Imagine a serene day in the wilderness suddenly transforming into a life-or-death struggle. On December 25, 2024, police officers faced the unimaginable when a grizzly bear attacked during a routine patrol in Wyoming. This shocking incident, along with other harrowing encounters, reveals the unpredictable nature of wildlife and the courage of those who confront it. From a lone hiker's desperate fight for survival to a family's holiday retreat turned nightmare, join us as we recount 6 gripping true stories of survival against the odds. Prepare to be captivated by the raw power of nature and the resilience of the human spirit. On December 25, 2024, in the snow-covered forests of Wyoming, the day began like any other for Officer Adam Miller and his partner, Sarah Bennett. Both were seasoned police officers known for their dedication and bravery. Adam, a 37-year-old father of 2, had been on the force for 15 years. His calm demeanor made him a pillar of strength in their department. Sarah, 29, had joined the force 3 years prior. With her sharp instincts and unyielding determination, she quickly gained respect among her peers. Adam and Sarah were patrolling near the Wind River Range, an area known for its rugged beauty and dangerous wildlife. Around noon, they received a call about a potential injured animal siding deep in the forest. Local authorities suspected poaching activity, a growing problem in the region. The 2 officers were dispatched to investigate, equipped with standard gear but unaware of the peril awaiting them. The drive to the remote site was treacherous. Snow blanketed the narrow roads, and towering pines cast long shadows under the overcast sky. By 2 p.m., they reached the location and parked their vehicle. A chilling silence enveloped the area, broken only by the occasional rustling. As they walked deeper into the woods, they came across a tragic scene. A massive grizzly bear lying lifeless in the snow. Evidence of poaching was clear. The bear had been shot multiple times, and its paws had been crudely severed, likely for illegal trade. The officers were overcome with anger and sorrow at the senseless act. While Adam examined the bear's wounds, Sarah scanned the surroundings for clues. Suddenly, the sound of snapping branches caught her attention. She turned to see a colossal grizzly emerging from the thicket, its eyes blazing with fury. It was clear this bear was no ordinary encounter. It had likely been the mate of the poached animal, and now it was driven by rage. Before Adam could react, the bear charged with startling speed. It struck him with its massive paw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The force broke several ribs and left Adam struggling to breathe as the bear began to maul him viciously. Sarah raised her firearm, but the bear was relentless. She aimed and fired, but the bear turned its attention to her before she could act again. The bear slashed Sarah across the face, leaving deep bleeding wounds that blurred her vision. In sheer panic and pain, Sarah staggered back, realizing she was outmatched. Summoning her remaining strength, she retreated toward their vehicle, using the forest's dense cover to evade the bear. Back at the car, she managed to call for backup before collapsing from exhaustion and blood loss. The forest fell silent once more, save for the distant roar of the bear and the soft hum of approaching sirens. The nightmare was far from over, but reinforcements were on their way. The scene of terror would remain etched in Sarah's mind forever. As Sarah lay near the patrol vehicle, the faint sound of sirens in the distance gave her hope. Her vision was blurred by the blood trickling from her wounds, and her body trembled in the freezing cold. Every second felt like an eternity, and the harrowing sounds of the bear's roars still echoed in her mind. The backup team, responding to her distress call, arrived within an hour, bringing with them paramedics and wildlife experts. The rescue team found the scene more horrifying than they could have imagined. Adam's lifeless body was discovered near the remains of the poached bear. His injuries were extensive, with deep lacerations and multiple fractures caused by the bear's relentless attack. Sarah, barely conscious, was immediately treated for her injuries on site. Her face bore severe claw marks, and her body showed signs of extensive bruising from her desperate escape. The paramedics stabilized Sarah and transported her to the nearest hospital, where she was rushed into surgery. Meanwhile, the wildlife officers began tracking the bear, knowing the animal still posed a significant danger. The trail led them deeper into the forest, where the bear's tracks mingled with the blood-stained snow. The team acted cautiously, understanding the unpredictable nature of an enraged grizzly. Hours later, the bear was located in another part of the forest, where it had taken refuge. After careful deliberation, the officers made the decision to euthanize the animal. They recognized the tragedy of the situation, both for the bear, whose mate had been killed, and for the officers who had become victims of the encounter. Back in town, Sarah's recovery was slow and painful. The physical scars were matched by the emotional trauma she carried from that day. She struggled to cope with the loss of Adam, who had been more than just a colleague. Their bond as partners had been forged over years of shared challenges and victories on the force. His absence left a void that no one could fill. Adam's funeral was held a week later, attended by hundreds of fellow officers, friends, and family members. He was remembered as a dedicated officer, a loving father, and a hero who had given his life in the line of duty. Sarah, though still recovering, attended the ceremony with her face partially bandaged. She delivered a heartfelt tribute, vowing to honor his memory by advocating for stricter measures against poaching and increased safety protocols for officers working in wildlife zones. The incident sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Local authorities launched an extensive investigation into the poaching activity, determined to bring those responsible to justice. The event also reignited conversations about the delicate balance between human activity and wildlife preservation. Conservationists emphasized the need for better education and enforcement to prevent such tragic encounters in the future. For Sarah, the path to healing was long and arduous. She underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws and endured months of physical therapy. Despite the challenges, she returned to the force, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. Her experience became a powerful reminder of the dangers faced by those who protect and serve, often at great personal cost. The forest where the attack occurred remained a somber place, marked by the memory of that fateful Christmas day. A memorial plaque was later installed near the site, honoring Adam's sacrifice and serving as a stark reminder of the unpredictable forces of nature. For those who visited, it was a place to reflect on the fragility of life and the courage of those who risk everything to uphold their duty. On a quiet evening in August 2023, Mark, a seasoned camper known for his love of the outdoors, ventured into the heart of Alaska's remote forests. He was no stranger to the wilderness. Over the years, he had explored countless trails and survived harsh weather conditions. At 45 years old, Mark was respected in his hiking community for his resourcefulness and knowledge of survival skills. His favorite pastime was escaping the hustle of city life to find solace in nature's untouched beauty. This particular journey was meant to be a short getaway. Equipped with a sturdy tent, basic camping gear, and his trusted survival knife, Mark planned for a peaceful night under the stars. By late afternoon, he reached a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines and the soft hum of a nearby stream. As the sun began to set, the vibrant orange hues reflected off the water, casting a serene glow across the campsite. At 11 p.m., Mark was preparing his campfire, a routine he had performed countless times. The crackle of the flames provided warmth and comfort in the chilly night. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves broke the calm. Mark froze, his senses heightened. He turned toward the sound, expecting perhaps a deer or another harmless animal. Instead, emerging from the dense brush, a massive grizzly bear stood before him, its size amplified by the shadows of the firelight. The bear's sudden appearance startled Mark. Before he could react, the animal charged with a force that knocked him off his feet. The initial blow left him dazed, and he barely had time to grasp his knife before the bear was upon him. Its powerful jaws clamped down, tearing into his chest. Mark suffered deep gashes across his torso, blood soaking his shirt as the bear mauled him relentlessly. He tried to fend it off, swinging his knife in desperation, but his strength was waning with each passing second. The bear's aggression seemed endless, and Mark felt his energy draining. Yet, as suddenly as it had attacked, the bear paused, its focus shifting. Perhaps satisfied or sensing no further threat, it began to retreat into the darkness, leaving Mark battered and bleeding. As the adrenaline wore off, Mark's mind raced with the realization of his condition. He was alone, gravely injured, and miles from help. With dawn still hours away, Mark mustered his remaining strength. The cold intensified his pain, each shallow breath a reminder of the gaping wounds on his chest. The night dragged on as he lay motionless, conserving what little energy he had, waiting for the first light of day to guide him to safety. On the morning after Mark endured the harrowing bear attack, the sun rose over the vast Alaskan wilderness, casting a pale golden light over the dense forests and rocky terrain. Despite his excruciating pain and critical injuries, Mark's survival instincts took over. He knew he had to act quickly if he wanted to live. His chest throbbed with agony, and the deep gashes from the bear's claws made every breath a struggle. The bear's mauling had left his chest severely injured, with lacerations and bruises covering his torso. Weak but determined, Mark began crawling in the direction of the ranger station he had seen on his map earlier. Each inch forward was a victory, though the effort drained him quickly. The ground beneath him was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, and the weight of his injuries pressed him further into the earth. His movements caused fresh pain to radiate from his wounds, and blood seeped through the makeshift bandage he had fashioned from his torn shirt. Yet he held on to the hope that help was within reach. The journey was grueling. Hours stretched on as Mark dragged himself through the wilderness, pausing only to catch shallow breaths and reassess his path. The memories of the bear's attack replayed in his mind. He remembered the immense size of the beast, the sound of its growls, and the sheer force of its charge. Despite the trauma, he focused on staying alert, fearing another predator might emerge. By midday, Mark's energy was nearly gone. Dehydration and blood loss made him lightheaded, and he began to question whether he could continue. But then, in the distance, he spotted a sign of human presence, a trail marker indicating the direction of the ranger station. The sight renewed his determination, and he pushed forward inch by inch, ignoring the searing pain in his chest and limbs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark reached the ranger station. It was a small wooden structure surrounded by tall trees. He used the last of his strength to knock on the door, his voice barely audible as he called out for help. The rangers inside quickly sprang into action, shocked by the sight of his injuries. They noted the deep claw marks across his chest and the pallor of his skin, indicating significant blood loss. An airlift was arranged immediately. Mark was carefully transported to the nearest hospital, where medical staff worked tirelessly to stabilize him. The doctors commended his resilience, amazed that he had managed to survive the ordeal and make it to safety on his own. The wounds on his chest required extensive stitches, and his recovery would involve months of physical therapy to regain his strength. News of Mark's encounter spread quickly, sparking discussions about the dangers of camping in bear territory and the importance of preparedness. Experts highlighted the need for campers to carry bear spray, avoid hiking alone, and store food properly to minimize the chances of an encounter. For Mark, the aftermath of the attack was more than physical. While his body slowly healed, the emotional scars remained. He found himself reliving the terror in his dreams, often waking in a cold sweat. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, he resolved to use his experience as a lesson. He began sharing his story with others, emphasizing the respect and caution that nature demands. Mark never returned to the Alaskan wilderness, but his love for the outdoors persisted in a different form. He became an advocate for wilderness safety, encouraging others to explore responsibly and with the right tools. Though the attack had changed him forever, it also gave him a newfound appreciation for life and the resilience of the human spirit. In July 2022, the Harris family embarked on a long-awaited hiking adventure in the picturesque Cascade Mountains of Washington State. Doug Harris, a 45-year-old biology teacher, had always been passionate about the outdoors and saw this as an opportunity to share his love for nature with his teenage son, Ethan, 15, and his wife, Linda, 42, a graphic designer. The trip had been meticulously planned for weeks, with detailed itineraries and a backpack filled with essentials. The family hoped to bond over the beauty of the rugged trails and serene landscapes. The day began with clear skies and a cool breeze, perfect conditions for hiking. Doug led the way with his trail map, occasionally stopping to point out interesting flora and fauna. Ethan, curious and adventurous, peppered his father with questions about the wildlife, while Linda trailed behind, snapping photos of the breathtaking scenery. After hours of hiking, the trio decided to take a break by a shallow creek surrounded by dense evergreens. As they sat on large rocks near the water, enjoying their packed lunch, the peaceful setting was suddenly interrupted by rustling sounds from the nearby bushes. Doug assured the family it was likely a deer or small animal, but the noise grew louder and closer. Moments later, a large mother bear emerged from the thicket, followed closely by her two cubs. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Doug instinctively signaled for his family to remain calm and slowly back away. But the curious bear viewed their movement as a potential threat to her cubs. Without warning, the mother bear charged. Doug shouted for Ethan and Linda to run while he stood his ground. The bear reached him in seconds, knocking him to the ground with immense force. The bear began mauling Doug, clawing at his chest and arms as he struggled to protect himself. Ethan, frozen in fear, watched helplessly until Doug yelled for him to run. Summoning courage, Ethan sprinted into the forest, his heart pounding as he stumbled through the uneven terrain. Linda followed closely, tears streaming down her face as she prayed for her family's safety. Behind them, Doug's shouts faded into the distance. The family's once idyllic trip had turned into a nightmare. Ethan kept running, desperate to find help, as Linda struggled to keep up. Unaware of what was happening to Doug, they could only hope that someone would come to their rescue. The Harris family's harrowing ordeal had just begun, and their resolve would soon be tested in ways they could never have imagined. Ethan ran as fast as his legs could carry him, the dense forest around him becoming a blur of green and brown. His breaths were shallow and rapid, and his chest ached from the effort. Linda trailed behind, her fear for Doug fueling her determination to keep up. The uneven ground slowed their progress, but Ethan kept pushing forward, knowing every second mattered. The sound of his father's struggle with the bear echoed faintly in his mind, spurring him onward. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan and Linda reached a small clearing where they spotted a narrow dirt path. They followed it, hoping it would lead to other hikers or rangers who could help. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows that made the forest seem even more daunting. Finally, after another mile of running, they came across a group of campers setting up their site near the trail. The campers quickly understood the gravity of the situation as Ethan and Linda breathlessly explained what had happened. One of the campers, equipped with a satellite phone, immediately contacted the park rangers. While they waited for help, the campers provided water and tried to reassure Ethan and Linda, though the fear in their eyes betrayed their own uncertainty. Meanwhile, back in the woods, Doug lay motionless on the forest floor. The bear had dragged him several feet into the underbrush, leaving deep gashes across his chest and arms. His clothes were torn and his breathing was shallow, but he was alive. The bear, seemingly satisfied that the perceived threat to her cubs was gone, had retreated into the forest. When the rangers arrived, they moved quickly, following Ethan and Linda's guidance to the area where the attack had occurred. The dense terrain made the search challenging, and darkness was beginning to fall. After nearly an hour of combing the area, they found Doug. His injuries were severe, and he was unconscious but still clinging to life. The rangers stabilized him as best they could, applying pressure to his wounds to stop the bleeding. Doug was carried out of the forest on a stretcher to a waiting helicopter that had been called to airlift him to the nearest hospital. Ethan and Linda watched as the helicopter took off, their relief mixed with anxiety about the extent of Doug's injuries. In the days that followed, Doug underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the attack. His chest and arms bore deep scars, a permanent reminder of the encounter. Though his physical wounds began to heal, the emotional trauma lingered. Doug struggled with flashbacks of the attack and found it difficult to sleep. For Ethan, the experience left a lasting impression. The image of his father's bravery stayed with him, inspiring a newfound respect for the wilderness and its dangers. Linda, too, found herself more cautious, her love for the outdoors tempered by the memory of that terrifying day. The incident prompted the park to implement stricter guidelines for hikers, including clearer signage about wildlife and the dangers of straying from marked trails. The Harris family's ordeal became a cautionary tale for others, serving as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. Though their lives would never be the same, the Harris family remained grateful that they had all survived. Together, they worked to support each other through the long process of recovery, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced in the Cascade Mountains. In September 2020, Steve Harper, an experienced 39-year-old hiker, embarked on a solo adventure through the dense forests of British Columbia. Known for his love of the outdoors, Steve had spent years exploring remote trails across North America, documenting his journeys and sharing them with fellow nature enthusiasts. This trip was meant to be another peaceful escape into the wilderness, offering a chance to disconnect from the noise of daily life and immerse himself in the untouched beauty of the region. Steve began his trek early in the morning, setting off along a challenging but scenic route known as the Mount Robson Trail. The path wound through towering pines, crystal-clear streams, and steep inclines, offering breathtaking views at every turn. As a seasoned adventurer, Steve carried all the essentials: a sturdy backpack filled with supplies, a first aid kit, and his trusted hiking poles. By mid-afternoon, Steve had covered significant ground, feeling both accomplished and exhilarated. At around 4 p.m., he decided to take a short break near a small clearing to catch his breath and hydrate. While resting, Steve noticed movement in the distance. A large grizzly bear emerged from the brush, its massive frame casting an imposing shadow across the forest floor. Steve froze, instinctively assessing the situation. The bear appeared to be foraging and initially showed no interest in him. Confident in his knowledge of bear behavior, Steve decided to remain calm, hoping the animal would continue on its way. After several tense minutes, the grizzly seemed to move away, disappearing into the thick undergrowth. Relieved, Steve resumed his hike, maintaining a steady pace while keeping a vigilant eye on his surroundings. However, as he navigated a narrow section of the trail, he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls behind him. Turning his head, he saw the same grizzly bear charging directly toward him. Before Steve could react, the bear slammed into him with immense force, knocking him off his feet. The impact left him dazed and disoriented as he hit the ground hard. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, the grizzly was looming over him, its sharp claws tearing into his legs and arms. The bear's powerful jaws inflicted deep wounds on Steve's limbs, leaving him bleeding profusely. Panic surged through Steve's body as he realized the severity of the attack. Summoning every ounce of strength, he reached for his hiking pole, using it as a makeshift weapon to jab at the bear. Despite the unbearable pain, Steve refused to give up, determined to survive the encounter. As the struggle continued, Steve's relentless efforts began to wear the bear down. With a final, desperate thrust of the pole, he struck the animal on its sensitive nose. The bear let out a deafening roar before retreating into the forest, leaving Steve battered and alone. Steve lay motionless on the forest floor, his breath shallow and his body trembling. The world around him felt surreal. The towering trees and dense foliage blurred as pain coursed through his body. Blood seeped from his wounds, staining the ground beneath him. Every movement sent sharp waves of agony through his legs and arms, but the will to survive pushed him to act. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, Steve managed to gather his thoughts. He needed to find help. Despite the intense pain, he focused on one goal: reaching the nearest trailhead. With great effort, he propped himself up, using his uninjured arm, and began to crawl, his movements slow and deliberate. The deep gashes on his legs and arms caused searing pain, but he knew stopping was not an option. The forest was eerily quiet now, as if holding its breath after the violent encounter. Steve's body screamed for rest, but he forced himself forward, dragging himself inch by inch. The hiking pole he had used to fend off the bear lay discarded nearby, its once sturdy frame bent from the struggle. Steve clung to it as a crutch, using it to steady himself when he could no longer crawl. Time seemed to lose meaning as he moved through the dense undergrowth. The light filtering through the trees began to fade, signaling the approach of evening. Each passing minute felt like a battle against his own limitations. The pain, exhaustion, and fear of the bear returning threatened to overwhelm him, but he clung to the hope that help was within reach. After what felt like hours, Steve spotted a break in the trees ahead. The sight of a trailhead filled him with a renewed sense of determination. He knew that this was his chance to find rescue. Summoning every last ounce of strength, he pulled himself onto the trail, leaving a faint trail of blood behind him. As he lay on the trail, unable to go further, a sound broke through the stillness. Footsteps. A passerby, another hiker returning from a long trek, emerged from the forest. The sight of Steve's battered body stopped them in their tracks. Without hesitation, they rushed to his side, assessing his injuries and offering reassurance. The hiker quickly retrieved a first aid kit and worked to stop the bleeding while calling for emergency assistance. Minutes later, the sound of helicopter blades filled the air as a rescue team arrived. The medics worked swiftly, stabilizing Steve and preparing him for airlift. The extent of his injuries included deep claw marks and bites, leaving permanent damage to his legs and arms. As he was lifted into the helicopter, Steve's mind drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness, the adrenaline finally giving way to sheer exhaustion. The journey to the hospital was a blur, but Steve's fight was far from over. The doctors worked tirelessly to save his limbs, performing multiple surgeries to repair the damage. The physical recovery was grueling, with weeks of rehabilitation and therapy ahead. Though his body began to heal, the emotional scars from the attack lingered. Steve's encounter with the bear became a cautionary tale among hikers in the region. His story was shared widely, sparking discussions about the unpredictability of wildlife and the importance of preparedness. Steve, once an avid and fearless adventurer, found himself hesitant to return to the wilderness he had loved so dearly. Despite the trauma, Steve's resilience shone through. He used his experience to educate others, sharing lessons about safety and respect for nature's power. While his body bore the lasting effects of the attack, his spirit remained unbroken, a testament to the human will to survive even in the face of nature's fiercest challenges. On December 24th, 2021, the Carter family arrived at their cozy, snow-covered cabin deep in the forests of Montana. They had chosen this remote getaway to enjoy a peaceful Christmas, surrounded by the breathtaking wilderness. Mike Carter, 45, a contractor, loved the outdoors and often organized trips like these for his family. His wife, Liz, 42, was a teacher who adored capturing moments of their adventures with her camera. Their 14-year-old daughter, Emma, was a curious and bright teenager who loved exploring new places. And the family's loyal golden retriever, Max, accompanied them on every journey. The cabin was nestled near a frozen creek, surrounded by towering pines blanketed in snow. It was the perfect holiday retreat. Mike had planned activities like building snowmen and roasting marshmallows by the fire. Liz was excited to bake cookies with Emma in the small but functional kitchen, while Max, wagging his tail, was eager to explore the snowy outdoors. The first day went by peacefully. The family decorated the cabin with lights and ornaments they had brought from home, and Emma insisted on hanging stockings over the fireplace. Max enjoyed running in the snow, chasing after Emma as she laughed. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the temperature dropped sharply, and the family settled inside the warm cabin. They enjoyed hot cocoa and played board games, their laughter echoing through the wooden walls. On Christmas Eve, a cold wind howled through the forest as the family prepared for bed. Around 11 p.m., a loud crash shattered the stillness of the night. Max barked furiously, his growls directed toward the door. Startled, Mike grabbed a flashlight and Liz joined him, holding Max's leash tightly. Emma peeked nervously from behind her mother, her heart pounding. Mike cautiously stepped outside, his breath visible in the freezing air. The beam of his flashlight revealed their overturned cooler, its contents scattered across the snow. As he moved closer, a low growl sent shivers down his spine. From the shadows, a massive grizzly bear emerged, its fur bristling and its eyes locked on Mike. The family froze in terror as the bear roared, its powerful presence dwarfing the man. Liz screamed, pulling Emma back inside, while Max barked uncontrollably, his instincts kicking in. Before Mike could retreat, the bear charged, slamming into him with incredible force and sending him flying across the yard. Mike suffered severe injuries as the bear mauled him, slashing his chest and throwing him into the snow. Liz, trembling and desperate, grabbed the rifle they had kept in the cabin for emergencies. Her hands shook as she tried to aim at the bear. Meanwhile, Emma dialed 911 on her phone, her voice breaking as she reported the attack. Max continued barking, his fearless attempts to distract the bear, finally succeeding. The bear, irritated, turned its attention to the noise. It swiped at Max, but eventually backed off, retreating into the dark woods. Liz rushed to Mike, who lay motionless in the snow, his face pale. The chaos had left the family shaken to their core, and the long wait for help began. They huddled together, tending to Mike as best as they could while praying for rescue. Liz held Mike tightly, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding from his wounds. The snow around them was stained with red, and the cold only made his condition worse. She wrapped a thick blanket around him, hoping to keep him warm until help arrived. Max stood nearby, growling into the darkness, his protective instincts still on high alert. Emma, shaken but determined, stayed by the door, watching for any sign of the rescue team. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Liz felt a wave of relief, but knew they still had to keep Mike stable. She tore strips from a spare blanket to use as makeshift bandages, wrapping them tightly around his chest and arms to slow the bleeding. Mike's breaths were shallow, his face pale, but he managed to stay conscious. When the emergency responders arrived, they quickly assessed the situation. The paramedics worked swiftly, placing Mike on a stretcher and securing him for transport. His condition was critical, and every moment counted. Liz and Emma were allowed to ride with him in the ambulance, while Max stayed behind with one of the responders, who promised to keep him safe. The journey to the hospital felt endless. Liz gripped Emma's hand tightly, whispering words of comfort as they watched the paramedics administer oxygen and monitor Mike's vitals. By the time they reached the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses was waiting, ready to begin life-saving procedures. The hours that followed were filled with anxiety. Liz and Emma sat in the waiting room, their hearts heavy with worry. They could hear the faint sounds of machines and hurried footsteps beyond the closed doors, each sound a reminder of the fragile situation. When the doctor finally came out, his expression was serious but hopeful. Mike had survived surgery, but his injuries were severe. Mike suffered broken ribs, deep lacerations on his chest and arms, and significant blood loss. His recovery would be long and challenging, both physically and emotionally. The next few weeks were a blur for the Carter family. Mike remained in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries and physical therapy sessions. Liz and Emma visited him every day, bringing cards and messages of support from friends and family. Max was reunited with them, his tail wagging furiously as he greeted Mike with a gentle nuzzle. The attack left a lasting impact on the Carters. Mike's once adventurous spirit was dimmed, replaced by caution and a sense of vulnerability. Liz struggled with nightmares about that night, often waking up in tears. Emma found herself more protective of her family, her youthful sense of invincibility shattered. Despite the hardships, the Carters found strength in each other. They began attending support groups for survivors of wildlife encounters, sharing their story and listening to others who had faced similar experiences. Mike's progress in physical therapy was slow but steady, with each small victory celebrated as a family. The cabin in Montana remained untouched, a haunting reminder of the terrifying night. The Carters decided never to return, choosing instead to spend future holidays closer to home. They installed security systems and took self-defense classes, determined to feel safe again. The attack also spurred changes in the local community. The incident was widely reported, leading to increased awareness about the dangers of human-wildlife interactions. Local authorities implemented stricter guidelines for food storage and camp safety, hoping to prevent similar tragedies. For the Carters, the scars of that night would always remain, but so would their resilience. They had faced the unimaginable and survived, bound together by love and the determination to move forward. Their story became a symbol of courage and survival, inspiring others to respect nature's power and cherish the moments they had with their loved ones. In June 2022, Brian Harper, 32, and his longtime friend Jason Mills, 34, set out for a fishing trip in the tranquil wilderness of Idaho. The two friends, seasoned anglers, had planned this trip to escape their hectic lives in Boise. Brian, a software engineer, often sought solace in nature, while Jason, a firefighter, loved the thrill of outdoor adventures. They chose a remote riverbank along the Salmon River, renowned for its serene beauty and abundant fish. The morning was perfect. The sun filtered through the towering pine trees, casting shimmering patterns on the water. By 10 a.m., Brian and Jason had set up their gear near a secluded spot. They laughed and reminisced as the cool breeze carried the sound of the gurgling river. The trip was shaping up to be exactly what they had envisioned: peaceful and refreshing. As they reeled in their catches, the distinct scent of freshly caught fish filled the air. Unbeknownst to them, the smell was also attracting unwanted attention. Brian noticed movement in the dense undergrowth nearby. Thinking it might be a deer, he pointed it out to Jason. Moments later, a massive grizzly bear emerged, its size and presence immediately silencing their laughter. The bear stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air, its focus shifting toward the fish they had caught. Jason whispered for Brian to stay calm as they began to back away slowly, leaving their gear behind. Despite their cautious retreat, the bear's demeanor changed. It dropped onto all fours, letting out a guttural growl that echoed through the wilderness. The grizzly charged. In a frantic attempt to create distance, Jason lost his footing and fell into the river. The current carried him downstream as Brian screamed his name. The bear, undeterred, turned its attention to Brian. With no weapon to defend himself, Brian grabbed his fishing rod and swung it in desperation. The bear swatted the rod away with a single powerful blow, sending Brian sprawling onto the rocky bank. The bear loomed over him, its eyes wild and teeth bared. Brian scrambled backward, his heart pounding as he searched for anything to shield himself. The attack was swift and brutal. The bear struck him across the chest, knocking him unconscious. Brian was left with severe injuries from the attack, including deep lacerations and broken ribs. The bear had struck with terrifying force, and for a brief moment, Brian lay unconscious on the riverbank. When he slowly regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the blood soaking into his clothes. His chest and legs were covered in deep gashes from the bear's claws. The pain was overwhelming, and his head spun as he struggled to stay alert. He realized with horror that Jason was nowhere in sight. Panic surged through him, but he fought it back, knowing that he needed to focus on surviving. Brian's heart pounded in his chest as he took in his surroundings. The bear had retreated, but it was not gone for good. He could hear its heavy steps in the distance, and he knew that if it decided to return, he would be in no condition to defend himself. Blood continued to pour from his wounds, and the pain intensified with each breath. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him, weakened by the attack. Despite this, Brian pushed himself forward, inching toward the trailhead where he hoped to find help. As Brian struggled to move, the pain from his injuries became almost unbearable. His vision blurred, and his strength waned. He knew he had to keep going, but every step felt like it was pushing him closer to collapse. In the distance, he could hear the sound of rushing water and the occasional call of a bird. He knew the trailhead was nearby, but it felt impossibly far away. After what felt like hours, Brian finally saw movement. A figure appeared walking along the trail. It was another hiker, and Brian's relief was immediate. The hiker approached quickly, noticing the blood-soaked shirt and the injured man on the ground. Without wasting any time, the hiker called for help, staying with Brian as he tried to keep him awake and alert. Rescuers soon arrived, bringing first aid supplies and medical equipment. They carefully lifted Brian onto a stretcher, securing him for the trip to the hospital. Despite the heavy pain and exhaustion, Brian managed to stay conscious long enough to be airlifted to safety. He was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors immediately began to treat his injuries. The attack had left Brian with extensive wounds. His chest and legs were covered in deep lacerations, and his ribs were broken in several places. The physical scars would take months to heal, but it was the emotional trauma that would leave a lasting mark. The memory of the bear's attack and of seeing Jason being dragged away haunted Brian's thoughts every day. As for Jason, the search for him began as soon as Brian was safely in the hands of medical professionals. Rescue teams scoured the area, but it was days before Jason's body was found downstream. The river had carried him far, and by the time the team discovered his remains, it was too late. The attack had claimed Jason's life, leaving Brian devastated by the loss of his close friend. In the aftermath of the attack, authorities in Idaho tightened safety measures in the area, warning hikers and campers about the risks of encountering bears. The tragedy also sparked a renewed focus on bear safety education, emphasizing the importance of maintaining distance from wildlife, especially in areas known to be frequented by large predators like grizzly bears. For Brian, the road to recovery was long. He faced months of physical therapy to regain strength and mobility, but the emotional scars remained. He could no longer bring himself to venture into the wilderness, where the memory of the bear and his friend's death loomed large. Though he had survived the attack, the experience had changed him forever.